Yes, I was already hoping to come to Buddhafield when I received the invitation from Yeshe Bodhi. So, like, the two things came together very nicely for me. And it's very nice and very special to be able to be here and to share with you some of the things that I do. I'd like to start off just by maybe saying a little bit of background to myself, because I think that probably some of you I already know, but despite the rather grand introduction, I'm not sure that all of you know my background in terms of teaching and so on. I'm involved with the Amida Trust, which runs a psychotherapy training program, among other things. We're a Pure Land Buddhist group based in Narborough, which is just outside Leicester, and we run a psychotherapy training program from a Buddhist perspective. And my role within Amida, or one of my roles within Amida, apart from being an acharya, which is teaching in general, is to head up that psychotherapy training program. And so a lot of my life is to do with looking at Buddhism as an approach to psychology. And one of the things that I'd like to do this afternoon as part of this talk is to give you just a very small insight into how we understand that. Because in part, it's out of that understanding of Buddhist psychology that we have developed an approach which we call other-centered approach. And it's out of that other-centered approach that I've come to appreciate the importance of working in the environment, as well as working in human environments, working in physical, natural environments. And so, in many ways, the journey into Buddhist psychology and understanding how the mind is conditioned and the processes which lead to that I've arrived back full circle at one of the great loves that has always been there in my life, which is the love of being in the natural world. And so it feels very special to be here this afternoon, to be able to share with you some of the things that I feel passionate about, which are Buddhism, the natural world, psychology, ideas, but more than anything, connection. So, we have a title, Finding Yourself in Love with the Earth. I'd like to start off, therefore, with getting a little bit soppy, thinking about what do we mean when we say that we're in love. Okay, and I'm going to have to move out of the way of the microphone straight away to get my pen. Okay, to resume. Okay, being in love. What happens when we're in love with somebody? Well, I think the first thing that I would like to think of when I think about being in love with somebody is that one cares deeply for the other. You know, when we're in love with somebody, that person becomes the focus of our life. We become interested in everything about them. We become appreciative of them. We care about how they're feeling. We care when they're upset. We care when they're hurt by something else, by somebody else. We care when they're struggling to do something and achieve something. We care when they do achieve something and we celebrate with them. Our life very much revolves around our care for that other. And at the same time, we ourselves are on the receiving end and we feel deeply loved, held, and deeply appreciated. We feel connected, we feel that person's love for us in many details of life, in the way that they look at us, in the way they hold us, in the way they do things for us, in the way they understand us. That holding is something that we are aware of, even when we're not actually physically with them. We still feel that they are there in the world, holding us in their awareness, and through that there is that deep faith that they are there for us. When we're in love, we see the beauty of the other person. We see the good things about them. We look at them and we feel lit up by their radiance. But also we see beauty in everything around us. You know, when you're in love, you walk down the street and everybody looks happy and smiling, and the sun's shining, and the flowers are out, and we notice all the good things. So when we're in love, our whole beingness is permeated by that being in loveness. It's not just a matter of, I'm in love with this person, so this person is beautiful. It's like the whole world becomes beautiful and radiant when we're in love. When we're in love, we come to appreciate the details. We appreciate all those little things that the other person does for us. You know, we appreciate the fact that they do the washing up, or make us breakfast in bed, or tidy up the sitting room when we've left it in a mess. Or, you know, all those little things that they do. They buy our favourite sweets and bring them home for us. Or they put our favourite programme on the television, or they arrange their evening so that we can go out at the time when we usually go out to do whatever it is, go to the gym or whatever. We appreciate all those little details and we notice them. It's like our attention, when we're in love, becomes much more focused and precise. We start to see the specifics of what goes on. When we're in love, we discover new things about ourselves. When we fall in love, often we discover that actually there are a whole lot of things that we can do and that we're interested in life that we've never realised that we were interested in before. You know, our friend is fascinated with old cars. Suddenly we start noticing old cars, spotting them on the street, becoming fascinated by what date they were made and who made them and who's driving them now. Or our friends deeply into existential philosophy, and suddenly we discover that we have an interest in existential philosophy. Or our friends into some sort of obscure music. We suddenly find we just love that new music, and like when we hear it, like our body is kind of, we're all ready to go. You know, so it's like when we're in love, we discover all these new facets that we have. And some of them may be things that we're introduced to by the other, but some of them are maybe things that we just discover in ourselves. Somehow we gain confidence. We feel, oh yes, I can have a go at that now. With this person's support and love, you know, I can try that thing that I've always wanted to do and never quite had the courage to do. I'm a more confident person. I'm a more creative person. I'm a more imaginative person. You know, we find all these facets in ourselves because we feel held, loved, cared for, and we start to open up to them. When we fall in love, we enjoy talking to one another. We enjoy sharing interaction. We enjoy conversation. We enjoy finding out about the other person, discussing things, sharing our ideas and thoughts and so forth. We enjoy that process of engagement that goes on. And when we're in love, we enjoy co-creating things. We live creatively together. We start to move out from our habitual ways of doing things. We join in life projects. We find things that enthuse us together, and then we find ways of taking them forward. We go out, we meet new people together. We do new activities together. We go out to save the world together. Whatever it is, that togetherness gives us a sort of power, and the being in love gives us a power that actually we're able to go out there and give that love back, not just to each other, but to many others, to the world. And I think the really creative relationships are the relationships in which the two people are not just looking to one another, but are looking outward and saying, how can we, as a pair, apply ourselves? How can we do something which is useful, which actually helps others and not just kind of satisfying our own individual needs? And, I think the motivation for this comes out of a sort of shared energy that comes from that shared love. It's like if the love is generating energy, if it's happy, if it's fulfilling, then it's something that we put out to others and we're able to give forth, and from that wellspring we're able to give much more widely. Please do come in, those people who are waiting in the doorway. Don't get soaked there. All of these things, I think we can recognise them in human relationships. But I think there are also things which, in my experience, come out of falling in love with the earth. And I think falling in love with the natural world is something which I've done over and over again in my lifetime. And particularly, I had an experience of it last summer. Last summer, I was out at our centre in France. Our group has a centre in Amida, France. And I'd arranged to run a week of ecotherapy there. So I was co-running a group with another member of our community, and we were working with a number of people, taking them out into the fields and the woodlands and doing various exercises and so forth. And we, in that process, what I started to discover was that not just was this a very interesting environment to work in and a place that was creative, but that through doing it, actually through being in that place, something in me was changing. Something in me was being touched. And at the end of the week, I said to my friend, something? I think I've fallen in love with these woods. Because I started to notice that in me there was this sort of feeling of deep care, but also a feeling cared for. It's like when I walked into the woods, there was love, growth in the trees around me. I saw the beauty. I noticed the details of the little things. I delighted in seeing the insects, in seeing the changes and things that grow. I could diverge there and say that I was back at our centre in France in January, and I think this is a very interesting little example of what happens when we start to live in nature. One of the reasons I'm sitting in a chair here is because when I was out in the centre over Christmas, I had a fall. I slipped over on the ice and I broke a couple of vertebrae. So I was confined to our centre in France. And a lot of my healing process happened by going out and walking in those very same woods. And what I found was that actually living there in this space that I had come to feel so much love for and so much attention for, that one of the things that became a sort of reinforcing factor in it was that I would go out and I would walk in the woods. And you know how it is, you go out in January and everything seems dead. It's like you've got all the last autumn's leaves lying on the ground. We've got a lot of oak woods, and so, you know, there's these brown oak leaves lying there. Very little that's green or alive, maybe a bit of ivy, a few other evergreen shrubs, but nothing very much. But I was walking the same paths because I was very limited in what I was able to do at first, because I would just kind of walk up and down the same path, and I'd been told to walk in order to help my back, but I couldn't do great distances. What I would notice was that each day as I went out, there would be changes. So to begin with, it was just these dead leaves, and then I would see just in amongst the leaves, just tiny little specks of green, just beginning to poke through. And these are like the beginnings of the bluebells and the other spring bulbs that come up in the woods. And you could just see the very beginnings of them just peeping through the leaves. And then the next day I would go out and they'd still be there, and the next day. And I would realise, like, day after day, each day they would be just that fraction bigger, until, you know, after a week or so, they'd maybe be an inch high. And by the time I left at the end of January, they were kind of about 3 or 4 inches high. That process of just noticing those little details, that process of growth, very profound. And right alongside, like, the healing in my back, you know, I was noticing my own body was changing and shifting as I was going for these walks. Like, to begin with, I could just about, the first walk I think I got as far as the washing line, which is like half a field away. Then the next walk I managed to get into the next field where we have a bonfire. And then the next walk I managed to get to the far end of the next field where the woods start, and then I had to go back. And so on, until I was able to do a sort of circuit walk around. And so I would notice this sort of little growth in what I was able to do happening gradually, naturally unfolding. And my body miraculously healing itself. You know, I mean, what kind of a miracle is that? You know, you fall flat on your back, you break a couple of vertebrae, you know, they're all smashed up. I saw the x-ray and like they were kind of completely crushed where I'd landed. And like somehow from that, gradually something in my body is getting together. All these different sort of healing mechanisms are working and gradually mending until like the whole thing has knitted itself back together, and I'm able to just walk. And, you know, look, now I'm pretty agile. I'm doing most of the things I ever was doing. I mean, I prefer sitting in a chair because sitting on the ground does get a bit hard, and I do start to get a bit sore. But basically, I'm pretty much back to normal, you know, 6 months later. And so, you know, in my body, there's this miraculous process of growth and healing going on. And out there in the wood, there's this miraculous process of change and growth going on. And the two are complementing each other. You know, I'm seeing my body and this wood are not so different. We're all organic substances which change and grow and process. Please do come in. You're worrying me standing in the rain there. And, you know, through that process of change and through noticing the little details of it, it's like we come to this deep appreciation. We reinforce this sense of the love which is there in this relationship, both with the environment and with the processes of life. And through being in this environment, you know, we start to change, we start to appreciate and grow, we start to discover new things in ourselves. We start to interact with the environment and find ways of being with it. we find ways to be creative. So I think all of these things that I've said, which are characteristics of being in love, I think they're very applicable to our relationship to the environment itself. I started off by talking a little bit about my background and saying that my background is rooted in Buddhist psychology. So I'd like to, at this point, talk a little bit about the model that I work from in terms of Buddhist psychology, not particularly because this is a talk on Buddhist psychology, but because it's a model which underpins my thinking about working with the environment therapeutically. So I want to just give you a sort of where I'm coming from kind of flavour. Maybe I can just say a little bit more about the structure of what I'm planning to do today, assuming that we have time to get through it all. I'm going to talk a bit about Buddhist psychology. I'm going to talk a bit about environmental therapies. Then I want to take you through a process where you're going to do something active, because I think a 2-hour slot is quite a long slot to just sit and listen to me talking. So a bit of relief, you're going to get to do some. And I want to take you through a process that will illustrate the way that different ways in which we might work with the environment. And then I can talk a little bit more about Buddhist practice and environmental therapies. Okay, so digression to give you a sort of roadmap of Buddhist psychology. In our model of Buddhist psychology that we teach at the Amida Trust, where we're coming from basically is that what we've done is look at the Buddhist teachings, the sort of core teachings that the Buddha gave, the teachings like the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, the skandhas, the Eightfold Path, and so on and so forth. Take all those really basic teachings that are there in all of the Buddhist sutras and texts, and to look at them and say, what sort of model of the mind do these describe? And when we understand the sort of model of the mind that these describe, what do these suggest in terms of therapeutic applications that we might use? So I'm going to now give you what I think of as sort of Buddhism on a postcard. Okay, you can argue with me later as to whether this is your agreement of Buddhism on a postcard, but this is my version of Buddhism on the postcard, and I'm up here, so I'm going to give it. Okay, so Buddhism on the postcard. First thing I will take from Four Noble Truths. What did the Buddha discover? The Buddha discovered that there was dukkha, there was affliction. The Buddha's whole journey was based on his encounter with affliction. If you look at his experience, the four sights, what did he see? He saw sickness, old age, death, and the sadhu. So his whole spiritual journey was motivated by the experience of encountering affliction and recognizing it. And in his teaching on the Four Noble Truths, which was one of his first teachings, first noble truth, there is affliction. There is dukkha. Things happen to us that are bad. We get sick, we get old, we die, we are separated from those we love, we don't get what we want, we are disappointed, etc., etc., etc. Life can be awful sometimes. Life is impermanent, life is difficult, things are hazardous, and so on. So, in terms of what's there in the world, first noble truth, impermanence, difficulties, painful things. Of course, there are many beautiful, good, wonderful things as well. And one of the things that I think environmental therapies do is they open us up to all of this. So I would like to put here also beauty. Because in the world we have dukkha, yes, but we also have the beautiful things, the wonderful things, and I don't want to lose those. Okay? So first noble truth is dukkha. Now, how do we deal with this reality of dukkha? Well, in the teaching of the second noble truth, the Buddha talks about the way in which we cling to objects. So if this is me standing here in the world, what do I do? Well, the world is full of people and things. Drawing lots of things here. We have a world that's a real, physical world. Buddha never denied the physicality of people and trees and tents and rain and sun and all those sorts of things. But what he said is that we cling. Second noble truth. We cling through our senses, sense attachments, and we basically, out of these things, we construct a sense of self. We allow all these things to give us a sense of who we are, and we create a kind of bubble around ourselves of objects that we identify with and which we use, lakshana, as pointers towards ourself. And so, rather than living in a world that is just a world of objects which exist in their own right, all of us inhabit worlds of objects which, in some ways, psychologically, we're using as props to our identity. We're appropriating things. We're viewing other people as functional in some way. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm viewing you in some way as an audience or a group of people who are here to listen to me. And so you're all functional for me. You know, you're not there as you and you and you. I'm using you to support me in my identity as the person giving this talk here. You know, and we all do this sort of thing all of the time. It's just normal human behaviour. I don't want to give the impression that this is sort of pathological in some way, because it's just how it is. We're unenlightened beings, and this is what we do. We live in a world that's a constructed bubble of viewpoints which point towards us. And this experience of distorted perception is what's called rupa, first of the skandhas. We can argue with this later if people have other interpretations, but this is the way that we would see it, is that rupa, first of the skandhas, is a description of the way that the world is perceived in a self-invested way, in a way that points towards the self, that has the power to construct the self, and so on. So we're living in a real world, a world that is potentially afflictive, but we're controlling that experience. We're creating a semblance of permanence by distorting our perception of reality. And of course, there's other things that we don't see which are outside of our worldview, and some things which we kind of deliberately banish, that we just don't want to know about because we don't want them to be part of our world. So, you know, it's not just positive forces and negative forces. This is sort of the process of attachment here is the process of greed, hate and delusion. So some of these things we identify with and we think, yes, that's my sort of thing, and some of the things we think, no, that's not my sort of thing and I don't want anything to do with it, and that's a hate reaction. And so there are some things that we exclude from our world. Okay, so this is basic Buddhist stuff. Question is, how does this inform psychology? Well, broadly, what we've developed is what we call other-centered approach, and that's the methodology book that we've produced on the style of working, which is about working with others. And broadly, the way that other-centered approach works is that a lot of Western psychologies are about looking at the self, investigating who am I, how do I think, how do I feel, what am I doing, what's my history, and so on and so forth. Where we tend to put our emphasis is on this, because actually this and this are mutually dependent. The way that we view the world and the way that we are actually reinforce one another. And so if you put your focus on the way you view the world, then actually you're going to impact on how you are anyway. And so in other-centered approach, what we're interested in is looking at all these objects that we're perceiving and that we're viewing in a particular way. What is it that we're doing to them? How is our view of them conditioned, to put it in technical language? Is it conditioned by our history? Is it conditioned by our sense of who we are? Is it conditioned by the sort of associations that we have for that object because of its context? Is it conditioned by our intentions for the future? Is it conditioned by... And there are a whole list of different types of conditions, and you can read them all in the Abhidharma. But basically, we can look at the way in which this view is distorted by our need to exist. And so this is one aspect of other-centered approach, is to look at the whole process of rupa formation. How do we construct a worldview, and kind of can we deconstruct some of that? Can we understand it and unpick a bit of why I see you in a particular way? But then also, the other thing about other-centered approach is that it's also about, can we get beyond that? Can we start to see the world in its own right? You know, can I actually get beyond needing you to be an audience and start to see you as a group of individuals? And actually, if I'm going to give a talk, then actually the more that I can see you as a group of individuals and have some sense of what your interests might be, the better the talk's going to be, because I'm actually going to be talking to you rather than talking to an audience. You know, it's always going to be a mix, because I can't, you know, I can't do it. I can't know all of you individually, and I'm going to have a sort of block view of you as the audience. But the more that I can start to get out of that and actually start to see you as individuals with your own interests and agendas, the better I'm going to do at communicating with you, and the better you're going to do at understanding what I'm saying, because, you know, there's going to be something real going on there rather than just a whole lot of projections and expectations and so on. So other-centered approach has these two aspects. It has the aspect of exploring the rupaness, but it also has the aspect of exploring the reality of the elements that we're looking at. Can we get beyond our rupa perceptions, and can we get to a real experience of them? And in this, there's also a sort of third element to it, because, you see, we are using all these objects in the world in order to condition our sense of self. But the objects themselves are real. You know, you are real people. And you have real expectations and agendas. And actually, you might well assert those things. You know, if one of you puts up a hand and asks a really awkward question, I'm going to be stopped in my tracks, and I'm going to have to actually think. And I might actually come up with something better as a result of that. Because you, as others to me, have that power to interrupt me, to surprise me, to wake me up. You know? So it's like, in other-centered approach, in a way what we're inviting is not just that we make the effort and we struggle to unpick all this conditioning that we've got. It's also that in other-centered approach, we are open to the world speaking to us. Okay, so I'm really talking about this because it's the underlying model that we use for psychotherapy, and we use it in general psychotherapy to look at people's relationships with other human beings, you know, whether they're in love with them or whether they're not in love with them. People connect with others in that sort of way, but also obviously this has implications for environmental therapies. And what I found is that other-centered approach also gives us a model which is very useful in terms of our work with environmental therapies. And allowing people to experience the physical, natural environment. You see, you can see exactly these processes going on. So you can work with the natural environment in ways which are about exploring people's rupa world. You can do that in terms of exploring their expectations. So, for instance, you take a group of people out into the wilderness. I was listening over there in the Eco-Dharma Dome this morning to a description of wilderness experience. People who go into that sort of experience, they come with a whole lot of preconceptions. You say wilderness to people, what comes to mind? I'm sure all of you, when I say the word wilderness, you have a picture in mind. You haven't seen this wilderness yet. You don't know what it's going to be like, but you have a picture of it, right? Maybe it's jungle, maybe it's arid deserts, maybe it's high mountains, maybe it's frightening, maybe it's exciting, maybe it's exhilarating. You have a picture of wilderness. That picture that you're carrying is rupa. It's all your preconceptions. It's what you put onto the world when you approach it. So we can look at all of that in relation to the environment. And some of that is going to be useful. Some of it may even be creative. We can do work around myth and so on. And that will all be creative work that's using the idea of rupa. But we can also unpick it. We can also go into the world and we can say, well, I've got these preconceptions, but what actually happens when I put myself into a situation, when I walk through the woods? Maybe I go into the woods with a sort of idea of, I don't know, teddy bear's picnic, or if you go down to the woods today, sure of a big surprise. Or whatever, maybe we're kind of expecting to go down and do some drumming. But whatever it is, we go out there, and each time we go out there, they're in the detail of it, they're in the specifics, they're in the little green shoots that are coming through the ground. Something new appears to us. And if we can get people to look more closely, then actually the woods will speak to them and will surprise them and will break them out of those preconceptions and give them the opportunity to expand and to become different, become changed. So, other-centered approach, the groundwork of the way that we approach environmental therapies. I'd like to move on at this point, and I'd like you to change gear a bit. I thought maybe I would read a little bit to you, because one of the things that came out for me, and when I talked about being in love, I talked about the sort of creativity that comes out of it, living creatively together. One of the things that came out for me from the process the week that I ran last summer was that I started to write. And I started to write particularly descriptive material. I wanted to share with other people my experience of being in the natural world. And so after each of the sessions that we did on the ecotherapy course, I would come back and I would write a blog post about my experience of being in that environment and how it unfolded for me. And later on, I compiled these blog posts into a book and interspersed them with some of the material. So I thought maybe today I would share with you a little bit of that writing, because I think it gives, I've talked theoretically so far, but I think sometimes the sort of immediate description gives you a different way into this sort of material. So I thought, as it's raining, am I close enough to this microphone? Yeah. I thought maybe I'd slip back a bit. I thought as it was raining, I'd maybe share with you a description that I wrote of an experience of the rain. It's raining when we go to the bamboo grove to meditate. The bamboo grove in our centre in France is an area quite near to the house where we have a very large area of bamboo. We planted it about 18 years ago, and it's now grown up into an area about the size of this tent. And earlier in the book I've got a passage where I describe meditating in it. And what's nice about bamboo is that it grows in such a way that you get these kind of little cells. The I don't know if you've been in a bamboo patch, but the bamboo sort of spreads itself out in lines, and somehow the lines come together, and you end up with these little sort of circular patches in it with no bamboo, and you can go and sit there with kind of bamboos all the way around you, and you've got this little sort of sitting-sized space to sit in, and you can sit in there and meditate. So it's a place that we used a lot during the week as our morning meditation space. So on this occasion, this is actually in the week following the ecotherapy week, when another member of the community was running a dance week. But anyway, that's not necessary to understanding this passage. So it's raining when we go out with this group to meditate in the bamboo grove. Light rain has been falling on and off all morning, and Massimo warns us to be prepared to sit in the rain. Some people bring thick jackets and even umbrellas, but I decide that as it's summer, I'll risk a more minimal approach. Exploring the environment, I reflect, cannot just be a fair weather pastime. Rain, too, is an aspect of the real encounter. I put on a sleeveless body warmer, padded and thick, to keep my core temperature up, but beneath it I have only light cotton trousers and a cotton shirt. Walking into the grove, I feel a mix of interest and resistance. There is a fine drizzle, and I wonder if the bamboo will provide any protection. Passing the barn, I pick up a piece of polystyrene, thick and rectangular, just the right size for a meditation cushion, and I find my place and sit down. Soon the drops of water are landing on my head and arms. I see the cloth of my trousers scattered with a growing number of round patches as the water creates spots on the dry fabric. Thoughts run through my head. The rain is increasing. The spots are appearing more frequently and start to join up. Soon my trousers will be soaked. How long will it be before my jacket also becomes waterlogged? Will I get too wet and cold by sitting through this session and end up sick? I'm aware that I have a tendency to be affected by temperature changes, so this is not an idle thought. Several times when I was younger, I got mild exposure when I was involved in outdoor activities and got chilled. I've learnt to be careful. It's my idea of experiencing the rain just a romantic notion. So you can see here the sort of thoughts that go through our head when we put ourselves into the natural environment. You know, it's like even before I've got there in the rain, I'm kind of thinking, is this going to be all right? Is it not going to be all right? I'm scanning back through my experiences of past things that have happened, and oh dear, you know, I got sick last time when I got too cold. Is that going to happen again? And all these sort of anxieties going on. This is the way the mind works. It's like the mind takes an event, but it doesn't just see it as rain spots. It sees it as a context of there are dangers here, there are anxieties here, there are possibilities here, attraction, aversion, and all that kind of thing. So this is like my mind running on. On the other hand, I reflect, and, you know, the mind argues with itself. This is still summer, and although the day is not as warm as it has been recently, it's certainly not cold either. I question my resistance. If this were water in the lake or from a shower, I'd not be avoiding it. Of course, sitting does still carry a risk of chilling, but at least at present the sensation of water dripping onto my body is not actually unpleasant when I stop fighting it and relax. And so at this point, it's like I'm moving out of this sort of preconception, and I'm starting to relax into just being here, sitting here in the rain, allowing the rain to fall onto me, recognizing that actually this isn't so different from other experiences of being in water. You know, what is the sort of raw experience of it? Drops continue falling on my knees, my shoulders, my head. They touch lightly, like fingers tapping me. I sit, letting them arrive, observing the pattern they make. The rain is increasing. It comes in waves, slowing to a scattering of droplets, then arising with renewed force as a gust of wind drives the clouds across the sky. When each showering arrives, I hear the first flurry of water as it first hits the far side of the bamboo clump. The wind and rain lash the leaves for some moments before they arrive at my sitting spot. I hear them gradually sweep across the patch, arriving at last as heavy drops that fall around me and over me. I'm protected from the wind, but I hear the leaves above me. The rain, on the other hand, gets through. The drops on my legs meet up. The water drips through the material of my trousers onto the ground. I'm getting soaked. I notice once more my tendency to tense against the wet, but then remember to find my curiosity and to relax. And I think curiosity here is very important to the whole process of exploring our relationship with the environment. I'm warm enough in my body warmer, and the rain has not yet penetrated it. Even if my legs are wet and a little cold, it's fine. I'm grateful for the polystyrene block that forms my seat, surprised by how much warmth it seems to generate. I sit, enjoying the musical rhythm of falling drops. I wake in the night to the sound of rain on my tent. The rhythmic pit-pat is insistent enough to drag me out of a dream, and I take moments to remember where I am. I lie, catching the sound of drifting sleepily through the layers of consciousness. It is warm, and I've thrown off some of my covers. I snuggle back into them and enjoy the softness of their billowiness, like clouds of thistledown blowing across the field. The raindrops are intensifying. They come harder and faster. There is something compelling about the sound, but there is something relaxing too. Like a heartbeat, it soothes me in the womb of my sleeping bag. There are few pleasures in life that are equal to lying in a tent in the rain and not having to get up. The prospect of getting up, of course, raises different emotions. Emerging from the tent into the stinging cold of rain shafts, or discovering that the water has penetrated the nylon shell and stands in unwelcome puddles on the ground sheet at the entrance, or worse, in my shoes, left too close to the fabric the night before, has a far less comforting effect. But tonight there are still hours of sleep to be had, and the rain clouds may well have rolled on eastward by the morning. So I lie, enjoying the warmth and the staccato sound of falling drops. We are born out of water, and when we enter this world we have already lain for 9 months in an aquatic haven, rocked and soothed by the movements of our mother's life. We have listened to the sound of her inner world, to the thud of her pumping heart and the gurgle and swish of intestinal meanderings, the circulation of blood in tissue. All water sounds. Her body is composed of water, infused by water, served by water. A bag of liquids, if punctured, it bleeds. Our early movements are swimming. Limbs extend and stretch through the amniotic lake as we kick out and discover our muscularity. Our mouth gulps fluid as we suck fingers and thumbs and practice feeding. We are nourished by liquid. The blood that flows from the placenta carries all that we need, all that we receive. Even after birth, we continue to be fed by liquid, a flowing, ongoing connection to our mother's body, sensuous and comforting. And so I doze into primeval sleep, soothed by the pattering on the skin of my tent. And so in that second passage, a different experience of water, and I wanted to share it with you because it rather reminded me of last night lying in the tent and listening to the rain on the roof of the tent. So these are two little snapshots from the week of environmental therapies, and I think what they illustrate is the way in which many of these different sorts of dimensions can be got from the experience of the environment. We can, in being in the environment, we can explore our reactions to it. We can notice our mental process in relation to these stimuli that come from outside. So we notice the stories that we're telling ourselves about the rain. We also, though, experience the rain itself, and the rain itself gets through to us. You know, it's like we have our story about it, but at the same time we really do get wet. And that experience, as it continues to happen, it continues to challenge us to reshape our thinking and to look at the experience in different ways. But also, it's like in these experiences, we're put in touch with other dimensions of our lives. We're put in touch with memories. We're put in touch with the universal, with the processes of life and death. We notice things like, it's like in that experience of being in the tent in the rain, we can experience through that connection to the basic life forces of birth. We can have these associations. We can use the sort of mythological base. And, when we start to actually look at the sort of mythological work that is often done in therapeutic and creative contexts, many of them actually rely on nature imagery. And so taking people into the environment, often we're naturally stimulated to be creative and to use these universal images and to tap into them and to draw on them and to then take them on into something new and use them in ways that feed our lives and allow us to expand and develop and so on. So many different sorts of experiences at the cognitive level, experiences at the bodily level, experiences at the level of sensation, but experiences that can enable us to expand in many different directions and to appreciate the reality of life, the beauty of the environment, but also all the layers of expectation, conditioned thought, and so on that we impose upon it.